Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. We're going to start again with Abu Dhabi, but with an update lens. As of Tuesday into Wednesday, February 3rd and 4th, U.S., Ukrainian, and Russian delegations were back at the table for the second round of U.S.-led talks. Yesterday, we talked about the talks restarting. Today, the update is who showed up and what that signals. This wasn't a light diplomatic crew. On the U.S. side, you had Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner again, but also Army Secretary Dan Driscoll and senior U.S. European Command leadership involved in consultations. That tells you this is no longer just theory. People are at least gaming out what enforcement and implementation might look like, even if no one's admitting it publicly. Ukraine's delegation was equally serious. Rustem Umerov was leading, with Kirill Budanov right there. That's not accidental. When your intelligence chief is in the room, you're not just talking about peace slogans, you're talking about threat vectors. Russia, for its part, sent heavy intelligence representation as well. This was a room full of people who assume the other side is lying until proven otherwise. Now, here's where the update really matters. Almost immediately after the talks began, Russian forces struck a market in Drushkivka with cluster munitions, killing civilians. We talked yesterday about Russia using energy strikes for leverage. Today's update is that the coercion didn't pause just because diplomats sat down. If anything, Moscow doubled down on the reminder. Same message as before, just delivered louder. Negotiations don't buy you safety. On substance, nothing fundamental shifted at the table. Russia reiterated again that Western-backed security guarantees are unacceptable. No European troops, no stabilization force, no NATO-adjacent presence. Russian officials explicitly warned that any foreign troops deployed to Ukraine would be considered legitimate military targets. We heard this rhetoric yesterday, but the update today is the timing. This was said while enforcement frameworks were being discussed quietly by Ukraine, Europe, and the US. Moscow isn't reacting to press statements, it's reacting to planning. Territory remains the brick wall. Russia is still demanding Ukraine withdraw from all of Donetsk Oblast, including areas Moscow hasn't taken militarily after nearly 4 years of war. Ukraine hasn't moved on that. What's changed slightly, and this is subtle but important, is the public mood inside Ukraine. Polling released this week shows about 40% of Ukrainians would consider giving up parts of the Donbass if there were strong international security guarantees. Yesterday, we flagged war fatigue. Today's update is that this fatigue is now measurable, not just anecdotal. That's a shift from early 2022, when territorial concessions were almost universally rejected. President Zelensky hasn't endorsed that path, but he's clearly preparing his population for hard realities. In an interview broadcast this week, he said roughly 55,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed since the full-scale invasion began, with many more missing. That number landed hard. Leaders don't release figures like that casually. It frames the stakes without conceding anything outright. Now let's talk about the winter campaign, because this is very much an update, not a new storyline. Yesterday, we talked about Russia ending any ambiguity around the so-called energy pause. Today's update is the aftermath. On the night of February 3rd into the 4th, Russia launched more than 100 drones, mostly Shahed variants, along with missiles at Ukraine's energy and heating infrastructure. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted most, but enough got through to leave over 1,100 apartment buildings in Kyiv without heat as temperatures dipped below -20 Celsius. The operational effect matters, but so does the pattern. Ukrainian officials said Russia used the brief lull to stockpile missiles and drones, then came back with a strike package significantly larger than recent attacks. Energy companies called it the most damaging strike of the year so far. This isn't escalation for escalation's sake. It's winter leverage, straight out of the same playbook Russia's used from Chechnya to Syria. Different decade, same instincts. Ukraine responded the only way it can: repair crews, heating centers, generators, triage. More than 200 repair teams were deployed in Kyiv alone. Energy officials warned that blackouts could worsen and that additional Russian strikes are likely in the coming days. The update here is that this is no longer a one-off crisis night. It's shaping up to be a sustained pressure campaign through the coldest part of winter. Zooming out, Russia's posture still doesn't look like a country preparing to compromise. If anything, the update is how openly it's preparing for a long haul. Ukrainian intelligence assesses Russia's unmanned systems forces now total roughly 87,000 personnel, with plans to expand further this year. These aren't novelty drones. They're being used to disrupt logistics, strike infrastructure, and grind defenses over time. Russia has also modernized loitering munitions like the Lancet, increasing payloads and autonomy. It's less remote-controlled hobby shop and more budget Skynet with worse branding. On the ground, there's continuity more than drama. Russian forces continue incremental advances near places like Pokrovsk and Sloviansk, prioritizing battlefield air interdiction over flashy breakthroughs. Ukrainian units report increased reliance on unmanned ground vehicles, robot mules, to move supplies under drone threat. The update here isn't a map change. It's confirmation that both sides are settling into a grinding, tech-heavy fight designed to wear the other down. Now, looming over all of this is the nuclear backdrop. And here the calendar flipped. On February 4th, the New START treaty officially expired. Yesterday, we talked about it approaching expiration. Today, the update is that it's gone. No binding limits, no inspections, no mandatory data exchanges. The last guardrail between the world's two largest nuclear arsenals just came off. Russia says it will act responsibly, which is a phrase doing an incredible amount of work. The U.S. says it's open to future talks, but wants China included. China responded this week by saying that's unfair, given its smaller arsenal, while continuing to expand that arsenal at a healthy pace. Beijing and Moscow used a video call between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin this week to reaffirm strategic alignment and energy cooperation. If this were a movie, this is the scene where the villain alliance smiles politely while the ominous music plays. On the economic front, the pressure is real and growing, and today's update adds texture. European officials say Russia's war economy is increasingly distorted. Oil and gas revenues reportedly halved in January compared to prior years. Inflation and interest rates remain high. Analysts warn fiscal reserves could drain quickly if this continues. In response, the EU approved a €90 billion loan package for Ukraine, with most of it earmarked for defense spending. First tranche could land as early as April. Russia, meanwhile, is scrambling for offsets. China has absorbed much of the oil volume India has pulled back from under U.S. pressure. Moscow is expanding gas exports to Georgia and continuing oil shipments to Cuba. Sanctions are biting, but Russia is still finding ways to keep cash flowing, just with fewer options and worse terms. Finally, a quick update on the shadow war. Russian intelligence activity across Europe hasn't slowed. This week, authorities reported that Russian military hackers exploited a newly disclosed Microsoft Office vulnerability to target Ukrainian and Eastern European government systems. Poland arrested a defense ministry employee accused of spying for Russian and Belarusian intelligence. Inside Russia, repression continues to tighten. More arrests, more foreign agent cases, more control at home to sustain war abroad. Thanks for listening and being part of the RH community. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. If you want to see some changes, email us at info@restrictedhandling.com. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.